Coming up next, my first project for 2025. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to another Initiative Modeler. Ready to get started here with my first build for 2025 after taking a couple months off here of the channel. During my hiatus, I did work on a number of different things. Let me just share a few of these projects here with you. First of all is a bust of Admiral Adama from the reimagined Battlestar Galactica series. This was beautifully designed by Antonio Dotto. He is the guy who designed those really nice busts of Picard and Data that I worked on for the Comic-Con art show last year. He's gotten really good at achieving some incredible likenesses of the characters, and this one is no exception. He does plan on doing some more from the Battlestar Galactica series. We'll just have to wait and see what he comes up with there. Next are a couple of busts from Blackheart Models, including this one here. This, of course, is the Baylock puppet from the Corbomite maneuver. Beautifully designed here as well, and I couldn't help but light the bust with the green and red lights here to kind of replicate what we saw on screen there. And here's another one from Blackheart. This, of course, is a salt creature from the Mantrap. Now, I also got around to making a few modifications to my work area here, first of which I changed out the poster. I always like to do that every year. This year it's a Cowboy Bebop poster. And as you've probably noticed, there's that in the background here. That was given to me by my friend Gary Wada. Reminds me of the Borg Regeneration alcoves, right? Makes a really nice display here for my workbench. And I did change out this area as well. This used to be the place where I would do my oil painting, but I've moved that upstairs. I now have my wash and cure station here. The reason I had to do that is because I had to put my printer into an enclosure. Now, this is something I've been wanting to do for some time, but this new Saturn IV Ultra printer that I have here was emitting more fumes than my previous ones. In fact, I never really had any problems with the two other Saturn models that I had. But if you want to know more about that and how I set this up, there's a video about it. In fact, that's the first video that was posted on the channel for this year, so you can take a look at that. Now, because this is wider, I didn't have enough room for the wash and cure station, which is why I moved it over there. And so after doing that, it opened up some more work area for me here also. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on now to what I have planned for my first build of the year. And whenever I'm returning to Wonderfest, which I am going back to that show this year, I tend to spend this time of year to prep and build projects for that particular show. And so that's what I'm going to be doing now. This box here contains the first three projects I'll be working on for the year. They're all 3D printed. And the goal here is to create projects that will be durable enough to transport. And so let's go ahead and take a look at what I have planned first. And as you can see, there's the parts for the other builds, which I will go over in future videos, but let's go ahead and set that aside for now. And as you can imagine, this has to do with Space 1999. So this year marks the 50th anniversary of that show, and so I thought I would do something besides maybe taking an Eagle model there or a Hawk model. I wanted to do something a little different, so I found this model here on CG Trader. So this, of course, is one of the laser tanks that we saw on the show. This model was designed by Sky1Z, or Sky-Own-Z, and this particular version I always wanted a model of, so I was really excited to find this. I bought the files, printed up all the parts, and I was excited to show these pieces on a Facebook page called Space 1999 Props and Chips, and almost right away I was told this is not a very accurate model. So let me show you some pictures of the model. This is what it's supposed to look like when it's completed. These other pictures here will show different parts that come with the model and how they fit together. Now, I did take the liberty to inform the designer of this model that there were these inaccuracies that were spotted, and he actually did get back to me by email telling me that he's going to take a look at the files that he's designed and make some modifications to make it more accurate. I'm just not sure when he's going to get around to do that, so rather than wait, and since I have all these parts already printed, I'm going to go with what I have. So let me go ahead and take a minute now to review all of the parts here with you, and in doing so, I'll also review some of the inaccuracies that they were pointing out to me. Let's take a look. Alright, so here we have all of the 25 pieces of the model that I have printed up, and let me start by saying first that my knowledge of this model was limited to what I had seen on screen, and as you might know, their appearance on screen was pretty limited and short. Now, I knew that there were two types of tanks, and this one in particular is my favorite of the two, and have always wanted a model of it. And I already actually have a model of the other version, which you see here. This one was produced by Product Enterprise, and is a die-cast model of that tank. So at first glance, it looked pretty good good to me when I saw it on CD Trader, so I bought the files and printed up all the parts that you see here. And as I said, once I posted this on Facebook, it wasn't long before some guys were starting to point out some of the inaccuracies. And so let me go ahead and take a second now to show you or walk you through these parts, and I'll point out some of those deficiencies starting here with the command module. So again, at first glance, I think it looks pretty good here, but once you start to compare it to a picture from the Space 1999 Catacombs website, you can start to see what they were referring to. So first of all, the shape of the module itself isn't quite right. The module should be a bit more pointed at the nose, and that inaccuracy also or already creates issues with the windows, which don't come to enough of a point. The sides of the module should also be a little flatter. They shouldn't be quite as rounded. And the other thing is, as you start to look now on these different surface panels, you'll start to see some other issues as well. Now, moving on to the main body of the tank, you'll again notice that it looks pretty good as you take a first glance at it. But as with the command module, you'll start to see how some of the details, for example, like these panels, aren't quite correct. This now here is the section that connects the command module and the main body together, and you'll see there are 3 indentations, which are of course meant to accommodate these protrusions that you see here. And it wasn't a snug fit because the male side didn't quite match up, so I had to use my Dremel to correct that. And that's why you'll see all these defects here. And none of that, however, is going to be visible when the tank's assembled. Next, we have this piece here, which fits under the nose of the command module. We have the 2 treads, along with the wheels. Moving on to some of the other pieces, we have the large antenna dish. These 4 L-shaped pieces here will be mounting along the aft section of the main body. And we have 2 small tanks that will be mounting just behind the command module. And one thing that was immediately pointed out was that the rear of the laser was much too large. This is the original piece that you see here. So I went ahead and printed them in 4 different sizes. If I do end up not using the initial piece, I'll end up probably using this one here. Well, I know to some people, a lot of these little imperfections and inaccuracies are enough to not want to build a model, but I tend to be a little more forgiving on this sort of stuff. I think overall we're still going to get a fairly decent replica of the ship. One thing I wanted to make mention is you might want to get a hold of this technical operations manual if you are a Space 1999 fan. If you recall, there was a technical manual released in the 1970s in a red binder. This one is a bit more detailed, and even includes a section here about the all-terrain exploratory vehicle. That's what this vehicle is called, and it's something that can be outfitted for a number of different missions on the moon, including defense, where they add the laser. Alright, so the color I'm going to be using here for the base color is this white gray from Vallejo. I think that's going to be a good choice. So first thing I'm going to do, though, is apply some primer before we get started with that. Alright, so all the pieces now have been primed and painted with the white gray. Here's just some video of me doing that. The parts are first primed with Vallejo's light gray primer, and just use my airbrush to spray on the white gray color, which went on without a problem. Now, one thing I wanted to share with you guys is a technique of mixing the paint right inside the cup of the airbrush prior to spraying. Now, this is something I did not do very often, and I typically had problems with clogging, but my friend Joe Hudson, who extensively paints busts and figures with airbrushes, taught me to keep things simple by mixing in a ratio of about 5 drops of reducer or paint thinner per 2 drops of paint. The reducer I'm talking about is the Cricut reducer. Again, you can also use paint thinner as well. Once the mix is placed in the cup, you simply plug the front of the brush with your finger, and the backflow that you cause mixes the paint. He just feels the reducer helps to keep the pigments together better than the thinner, but again, you can use both. Now, of course, this ratio has to be maintained if you mix up larger amounts, but I am finding this to be very efficient. It keeps the paint to a good mix that doesn't result in clogging, and it is a great way to keep from making too much paint and wasting it. Well, after getting the paint on all of these parts now, you can see all the rest of them are painted here as well. I went ahead and applied a gloss coat to these 2 pieces, and the next step is to go ahead and mask off the windows, which you can see I've started the process here. So this will probably be the most difficult part of painting this model. What I have to do is paint this area black and retain a white color around that frame that surrounds the windows that face forward. Well, I ended up hand painting the windows that face forward here, and once that was dried, I masked those off, and now I'm ready to paint these 2 other panels here and here. Well, this is how it turned out. Very pleased with how it's looking here. It was pretty easy to spray on the black here to the other panels. once everything was masked off. Again, just using the technique of mixing the paint in the airbrush. I was able to paint this with just a couple of drops of paint. All right, I'm going to go ahead and set this aside now and paint up the treads. And for this, I'll be using Vallejo's steel. And notice now that there are these teeth that line all along the edge here. When I originally printed this piece, you can see it didn't turn out too well. A lot of the teeth were missing, and I knew I was going to reprint it again and give it one more try. It was just a matter of being a lot more careful with removing the supports. Each one of these actually had its own individual support, and I had to take my X-Acto knife and just cut all along there. I was able to preserve most of them. You can see there's one missing up here, and yeah, I guess that's the only one there. And then we've got this other piece, which I have one of the teeth missing up there. But much better than the previous print. All right, the treads are all painted now, and I think the Vallejo steel, it's actually called Vallejo's oily steel, worked out pretty well for this. And as you can see here, I applied a dark wash just to bring out some of the lines there. And this is all set to go. So what I'm going to do next is assemble the wheels and the treads together onto this piece. By the way, this piece had to be sanded a little bit as I was trying to fit it into the front section here. I wanted just to show you a new sanding tool that I got. This is from a company called DSPIAE. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it's the same company that makes the rotary tool that I have. As you can see, it comes with a number of different attachments that fit onto the sander. These are pieces of sandpaper of various grits that are shaped according to the shape of the head that you're using there. And so for this, I ended up using the pointed sanding head and was able to sand down the front section here so that it would slide onto my piece much better. And I think this works out really well. It's much more accurate, and it confines the sanding to the particular areas you're addressing. And I know I'll be using this tool a lot with future builds. And before moving on to assembly, there's one other thing I'd like to show you now. This is the decal sheet that I made. There are a number of markings on the tank, and using those reference photos, I created these decals. My hope was to avoid having to paint on a lot of these orange and gray stripes and polygons. Again, this was done by using Photoshop. Here are some screenshots of the process after taking measurements of each of the panels that needed a decal. I created squares, rectangles, and polygons of similar dimensions and filled them in with various colors. So as usual, this decal sheet will be available to my subscribers in case you're interested in building this model. You'll have to size them accordingly to the size of whatever your kit turns out to be. But if you're interested, just email me at interceptormodeler@gmail.com. Well, as you can see, all the decals now have been put into place. I did not bother recording that because it's just simple decal application. Everything worked out pretty easily. Decals were printed on this inkjet paper. It's a decal paper. And this is now the main body. You can see all the decals are placed on here as well. And also put them on the rods and the laser. Well, next is assembly, which is very straightforward with this model and begins with the attachment of the wheels, which I use both super glue for the actual attachment and reinforced the whole thing with 2-part epoxy from underneath. This was then followed by the installation of the treads. And I then moved on to attaching the main body, using again both super glue in some areas and 2-part epoxy in others. Next was the command module, which was followed by the L bars at the aft section. And finally the main antenna. Okay, so here we have the tank put together for the most part. The only thing yet to glue on is the laser gun. I'll show you the completed tank at the final reveal. In the meantime though, let's move on to creating the diorama. So the diorama I have in mind here is inspired by the great Galactica Landing Bay diorama that I did from Cosmic Scale Models last year. I really want to create a very similar vibe with this project here. So let me show you with these pictures what I have in mind. The scene will depict a buzz of activity going on as a team preps the vehicle for a mission. Alan Carter will be seen standing with Commander Koenig and Tony Verdeschi discussing the details, while a crew in the background carries out a final inspection and loading of special supplies and equipment. As you can see, I found a forklift to print, and all of the figures here are both from CG Trader and Cults3D.com. The crew is drawn from the same group of figures I used with the Star Trek Air Tram diorama. I love how those files have figures of all different poses to choose from, and they are perfect for this scale. The Space 1999 astronauts are from Cults 3D and are designed by John Badgame. He did a great job with sculpting the suit, along with the chest and back gear. And when deciding how tall to make the figures, I used the back door of the tank as a reference. As for the base itself, I decided to depart from a square or rectangle and instead chose the shape of a polygon that I think will allow for all of the figures, equipment, and gear. So first I'll start with the figures, then I'll move on to detailing and painting the floor. Alright, so here are all the figures painted now, and I didn't bother to record much of this process as it can be pretty tedious watching someone paint figures, but this was just all done by hand using small brushes, and I'll list the brushes that I used below. I used reference pictures of the uniforms and astronaut suits as a guide, and this video now shows how I did my best to carefully apply all of those details, markings, and patterns to the clothing. And here is the entire cast of characters now posing for a group photo. So let's go through these real quick, beginning with the front row from right to left. We have Commander Koenig, Tony Verdeschi, Alan Carter, and a self-portrait of myself as the other astronaut. And as for what I call the lower decks crew of Moonbase Alpha, I chose two colors for their coveralls. I decided on yellow for engineering personnel, which is consistent with the gold-yellow designations of their standard uniform dress, and orange for the support crew. Here is the forklift put together now that I printed, and I decided to stay with the orange color scheme and added the Moonbase Alpha insignia to each side. And here it is with one of the pieces of equipment that I'll be adding in. And speaking of that equipment, here are the pieces that I'll be putting into the diorama. These are just generic pieces of sci-fi equipment I found on a 3D printing website. I'll post the link down below. One of them is going to go onto the forklift as I showed you there. The others are going to go next to some of the personnel that are inspecting the laser tank. I thought it would be interesting to add those in. I, of course, still need to paint them, and you'll see them in the final reveal. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the display. This is now the final stage of our build, and I decided rather than going with a rectangle or a square to go with this polygon shape that you see here. This will allow enough room for the placement of the tank and the people around it, and I'll be able to put the tank at a little bit of an angle just to make it look more interesting. So I went ahead and used my wire cutter, as you see here, to cut this shape out of Foamular, and the wire cutter, of course, allows me to get those nice straight edges. So this is all set to go. I'm going to go ahead now and cut out a piece of styrene to fit on top of here, and I'll be using my scribing tool to scribe in the lines of these panels. Alright, so this is the floor now. You can see it's been painted and weathered. To get this effect, I used the old hairspray and salt technique. I know I've demonstrated this numerous times on the channel, just a little video of me doing it, and I think it came out pretty well. Now, there's one thing I'd like to add to this. If you look at this illustration now from the technical manual, I want to draw your attention to the floor, and you'll notice a series of dots that are along the floor. I think they're just markers. And I'd like to replicate the look of those dots by using a paint mask. So this is the first one I ever created using a new machine that I have here. My wife got it for me for Christmas. It's called a Cricut machine, and I have a smaller version of it. They come in a couple different sizes, and I'd seen a number of YouTube videos of guys that were using this to create paint masks. So what I did was I went into Photoshop, created a dot pattern that you see here, transferred that into the software that comes with the Cricut machine, and I use this adhesive vinyl paper here. They have two kinds of adhesive papers. One's a permanent adhesive, when those are the kind you make decals for your cars and stuff like that, like stickers for your window. And you have something that's semi-permanent. It's not quite as sticky. So I'm just removing now the dots that were cut out by the machine. And once I do that, I'll be able to cut this pattern out and arrange it onto the floor so that I can use my airbrush to paint on this dot pattern. Well, definitely in the final stretch of the project now. What I'm busy doing is finishing up the pieces I'll be gluing onto the side of the display. Rather than using plain styrene to do that, I'm going to decorate the styrene and make it look like the sides of the buildings that you see on Moonbase Alpha. And then once that is done, I'll be painting these up an off-white color. So I'm going to complete that and also paint up those small pieces of equipment that I have left. And that is it. So I'm going to finish everything up here and show you the completed project
in just a second.
Okay guys, well here we have the finished Space 1999 laser tank diorama. The tank, figures, and equipment were 3D printed using files from CG Trader, Cults3D.com, and Thingiverse. I'll post links down below. Now, I'm often asked about scale, and I have to admit, I don't really think much about scale, but rather what can work best with my display space. As you know, I'm a bit limited with that. And since there was no actual full-scale mock-up of the tank built, the exact size really isn't known, but apparently the models were built on a chassis of 125 scale Chieftain tanks, and those are about 35 feet in length in real life. So since this model comes in around 5 3/4 inches in length, and also considering the height of the figures, this turns out roughly to be 1/67th in scale. So as mentioned at the beginning of the video, this isn't an accurate representation of the tank, but to a lesser Space 1999 trained eye, I think it makes a decent replica. The model has a lot of surface detail, and even though it's not all 100% accurate, it has good resemblance to what is seen on the miniature. The model includes 25 parts, which were easy to assemble for the most part, although I did have some issues with the parts that were keyed to fit together, requiring some sanding, and that, unfortunately, is a common problem with 3D printed files, so it's not unique to this kit. A few people who offered their critique of these parts online mentioned that one obvious flaw was that the end piece of the laser was oversized, and in response to that, I reprinted that component about 15% smaller, and I think that it now looks more in line with what's seen on the miniature. I should note that the model was printed at 80% of its original intended size. As for painting, the vehicle is finished with Vallejo's gray-white, which is a good base color to use for moon-based Alpha vehicles. And of course, to replicate the insignias and markings, I had to create my own decals, which worked well. Again, a JPEG of that decal sheet is available upon request for any subscriber. Just email me at interstellarmodeler@gmail.com if you're interested. All of the 13 figures that you see here were all made using files from CG Trader. I'll post a link down below. These are low poly or detailed figures, so not sure how well they would look if they were larger, but they are good for this scale, where it's not quite as crucial to see every single little detail. The designer, called Dolphin GS, offers a wide selection of character files, and all but one of these figures in the scene come from set 264. The exception is the Maya figure, which is from set 275, and I have to say that one of the standout features of these files is that they include over 260 different poses representing various people and giving plenty of options to work with. So as mentioned earlier, this build was inspired by the Galactica landing bay diorama I did last year from Cosmic Scale Models. My goal was to recreate the same sense of activity and motion within the scene, and I believe I achieved that. Technicians are seen inspecting and checking different parts of the vehicle, while a work crew brings in additional equipment. On the far left of the diorama, Commander Koenig, Tony Verdeschi, and Alan Carter are engaged in a discussion about the upcoming mission. To their right, an engineering technician uses equipment to check components. Another crew member is on board the vehicle discussing something with a worker, and another tech is inspecting the rear wheels. Towards the rear of the tank, a work crew is seen transporting equipment, overseen by myself, and this required printing a forklift along with those polygon-shaped storage crates that other crew members are moving. On the starboard side, another technician is conducting an inspection. Now at the last minute, I decided to add in one more figure, and that's this one here. It is of Maya walking over to Commander Koenig. Although she is usually seen wearing skirts, I didn't have a figure that matched that look. However, I did have one with a long sleeve shirt and pants, and as I recall, female personnel had the option to wear either skirts or pants. Since Maya was shown wearing slacks in a few episodes, I thought this figure would be a good fit. The hairstyle isn't exactly perfect, but that's okay. Maybe she just changed it for the day. I did feel, however, it was important to include her in this scene, given how significant she was in Space 1999's second season. And finally, adding the trim around the diorama provided a nice finishing touch. Replicating the look of the buildings was straightforward. I simply cut and glued strips of styrene of various widths and lengths to achieve the desired effect. Well, you know, when it comes to Space 1999, I've become a much bigger fan of Season 1 than Season 2, and so initially I did have in mind to have Season 1 characters in this diorama. However, when it came to trying to find figures for the diorama, I couldn't find any male figures that had long-sleeve t-shirts and pants that could be painted into the uniforms of Season 1. Instead, I came across these figures that had blazers, and if you recall, they wore jackets over their uniforms in Season 2, so I knew these could be painted in that color scheme to make them look like those blazers from the second season. season. And one last thing I wanted to mention here is I did leave the tank unglued to the floor. This is all in anticipation of having to pack this away for Wonderfest, so I will pack the tank separately. If that laser happens to come off the tank, it's not a big deal. It's only held in by one small little point there, so it'll be easy to reattach. The figures themselves are attached to the floor by just a tiny, tiny dab of super glue, so if they become unattached, they won't damage the floor. It'll be easy to put them back on. So just trying to make it as easy for myself as possible when I transport this thing. But I hope people enjoy looking at it. It's, I think, a unique piece that, of course, is, again, in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the show. Okay, guys, that is a wrap. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at illustratedmodeler@gmail.com. So coming up on the channel now, we'll be revisiting the year 1980, and you'll just have to wait till the next video to see what I have planned for that. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.